and welcome to Faculty in Focus. I'm Daniel Cantor, Associate Professor of Acting and Directing in the Department of Theater and Drama here at the School of Music, Theater, and Dance. And I am with Amy West, who is a lecturer in dance, and she is the health and wellness coach here at the School of Music, Theater, and Dance. Welcome, Amy. It's great to talk to you.
Thank you.
My first question is, what is the Amy West origin story? How did you come in to being interested in the arts, being interested in dance? How did it all start?
Well, when I was a young kid, my mom came to me and she just said, since you dance around the house, would you like to join a class? And I just remember standing by the refrigerator and she said, can you stand in first position? And I did, and I fell over. But that really started my dancing journey, and I actually was a gymnast up until about 14, 15, and then I just hit a growth spurt. So I do joke that ballet became my default, and just one thing led to another. So I just kept doing it.
Was there a point where teachers said to you, hey, you really should do this? Like, this is something you can do professionally?
Yes and no, because I was never the best in class. But I had a very strong work ethic. So I think that work ethic and that determination and drive is what really got me moving forward in my life with it. School for me was hard to sit through. I looked forward to dance, where I could just be physically active. So I know I was really drawn to that.
Oh, that's really interesting. So there wasn't like a mentor or somebody in your ear saying you should do this?
Not early on. I just kept putting one foot in front of the other, and I strived to be my best in the class, but I was rarely the favorite.
Huh, that's really interesting. And yet, 24-year career as a dancer and choreographer. Yes. And then your career evolves to include teaching. Mm-hmm. And a little more recently, personal training and wellness coaching. How did you evolve into those aspects of your career? What was the motivation? What was the impetus? How did those things come to be?
I think it was just a natural extension, because I find that when I was dancing full-time, I would teach on the side. And I figured out early on, if I could teach it, then I could be better at it. So if I had to explain it to a class of people, that made it better for me. And then as the bridge just continued over time, where it balanced out to being more of a teacher versus an actual performer, I love seeing the growth in students. It just sparks joy in me. So then as I started to look at next steps as my kids started to get older and my time opened up, I thought, let me pursue a health and wellness coaching certification to really help aging bodies, people with chronic illnesses and conditions, but also to pay back what was paid to me, so just to pay it forward. And the personal trainer certification really came so that I could have something fully within my scope of practice when I work with non-dancers, especially aging bodies, aging beautifully bodies. So navigating through that as well. So it just became a natural extension of my teaching.
And do you find that, and maybe this is too reductive of a question, so forgive me for this, but do you find that there's a common sort of thread for you in all of those practices as a performer, as a teacher, and as a coach?
I would say the common thread would be the movement, for sure. But it's not movement just on the physical realm. It's movement in stretching ourselves mentally, emotionally, physically, to grow what we see beyond what our comfort level is. We're meant to grow as human beings, to be challenged at any age. And that's really the motivation that I have in working with students or clients.
I feel like there's something in the arts that is almost a separate consideration, which is the teaching of skill.
Yes.
And it gets lost sometimes in the conversations about community relationships. Like, there is skill involved, and you have to learn the skill.
And I am all about skill because for me, coming from a classical ballet background, it's all about skill. You're told to drop your
Right.
hand an inch.
Right.
I mean, it's a fine art for sure. I think in anything that we do, we have to bring our best to it. Otherwise, we're not employable. I come from a background that is very much from the profession. So I am all about technique, and I am clear with the students. The arms have a specific position that they have to go through within the rules of ballet. Otherwise, that's choreography. So we have to know what those rules are in order to break them.
Right.
So I am very old school in that way, but I don't scream, I don't yell. That's not my style.
Totally.
Never has been, never will be. It was done to me. I will not do that.
Totally. It's not necessary.
No, can't we bring joy to our craft? It's a beautiful thing to be able to express who we are as individuals. There's nothing more beautiful than that. Why do we have to bash it down?
Right. And if the motivation is the pleasure of what you will experience by devoting yourself to the craft, the pleasure we will experience together. I mean, I'm sure I fail sometimes, but I try to motivate through positive impulses, right? What is the possible outcome here? What will we all experience if we do this?
Exactly.
Rather than a punishment model.
No, and you know, it's so interesting to see college students. Now, most of these kids have been dancing for a very long time. When I encourage them to basically grow up their technique beyond that 9-year-old, what would it look like now as 18, 20-year-old, 23-year-old student with more maturity, more life experience? And we explore that. An arabesque, for example, to get out of that unconscious muscle memory, whether it's fear or holding back, and just go for it. The worst that can happen is you can fall. It happens to all of us, but that's where we learn our limit. And then we can pull back. But if we don't push it, we don't learn that limit. We stay in that contained box.
Totally. That I love that articulation. You know, I'll say to students in class, like, you know, to take a risk, whatever that means. I'm like, and let's say you make a choice and it really doesn't work. What is the consequence? The consequence is nothing. There is no consequence. You're fine. You're not even going to think about it tomorrow. You know what I mean? You're totally fine. There's no consequence except you might learn something. And also, like, you know, when we talked before, you talked about the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivations. And I feel like the 9-year-old in dance class is looking for the extrinsic reward.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
Well done, yay, the parents clap or whatever. And as an adult, it has to be something intrinsic, doesn't it?
Yes. And that's so much of what it is that has to come from within. But that's just progression and growing up. There is a lot of extrinsic motivation in young children. There is. We want to foster at a young age that intrinsic. What brings you joy? Why do you dance? Why do you continue to dance? And then owning it. So it is passing that torch very slowly to have them take off and run with it. I was just working with impulse kids this morning, 15 to 17 years old. We spent 30 minutes breaking down pirouettes, and it was hard because we were very focused. And I said, follow my voice. And they did, and you could see every kid, they were so focused. It was beautiful. And then I said, partner up and teach your partner how to do what we just did. Put on your teacher hat, because I want them to walk away with this exercise that we did, and the way they were going to remember it was if they had to teach it to somebody else.
I like that. I'm going to steal that.
Do.
I like that. That's
Yeah,
great.
and then they took it one step further. For those who were comfortable, got out their phone, and they videoed them do. So the partner,
Videos themselves doing
the
it?
partner videoed with like your phone.
Yeah.
What I would take, and then They had it. They had record of it.
Oh, wow.
The
Interesting.
stages, the steps. So what's more valuable, me telling them how to do it and then we move on, or them having to teach it?
Right. Right. That's great. I love that. I love that. I'm definitely going to steal that.
And that's more sustainable.
Totally. Do you find that there's sort of a, you're working with all different kinds of people. You're working really advanced dancers, you're working with less advanced dancers, you're working with people who are trying to get healthy, you're working with people with some aging bodies where maybe they don't have the same capability. It's a wide range. Is there a common characteristic for people who are healthy?
A disconnect, maybe, and we dismantle that disconnect. We all want to be healthy and feel good in our bodies and feel good in our life choices. Sometimes there's a disconnect. So when we really sit down and start diving in, I worked with a client a few weeks ago from a young child who has had severe obesity. And now the health consequences are showing up, high blood pressure, diabetes. This client really wants to go to the gym, and they've been going, but it's very hard because the shame comes up from when they were laughed at as a young child in gym class. So when we got talking about this and really diving into the reasons, they were very intent on going to the gym and continuing with this. So when I asked the question, what's the worst thing that you can imagine happening? And my client said, to be laughed at. And I said, so if you were laughed at by anybody else in the gym, would you survive it? And they got very quiet and they said, yeah. So if that's your biggest fear and you feel you could survive it, now we know no one would most likely laugh
Right.
at the client, but that's a fear.
Sure.
A light bulb went off. Yeah, I could survive it. I'm the one going to the gym. I'm the one taking ownership of my health.
Wow. Now, sorry to interrupt you, as a wellness coach, I'm sure you're explicitly dealing with someone's mental health too. It's
Yes.
It's inextricably connected to your physical health. As a teacher, you probably can't do that as directly with students, but working with dancers, and I work with actors, they are their own instrument.
Yes.
So their psychology is part of that instrument. Like, how do you tread that line?
So, and this is a great question because to be within my scope of practice does not dive into therapy. So
Right.
where is that line? The line is if a person has to process, let's say, trauma, deep, deep emotions, then I would refer them to a therapist.
Right.
If we need to take a step back and look at maybe an event or a moment that happened, let's say in their childhood or in their time that they may have been aware of and continue to work through this, if we need to step back and look at that in order to then move forward, if the client is able to move forward or the student is able to move forward, then I'm within my scope of practice. And I have very clear boundaries with that.
Well, I'm wondering, I think we have to have clear boundaries with that, and it makes sense what you're saying. It's just an interesting conundrum of, maybe it's more explicit in acting, but I think it's in dance too, where, you need to put your heart and soul into something. There's an emotionality to what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Yet it needs to be a disciplined emotionality, right?
Yes.
It's through a form.
Yes.
But there's still emotionality. That's what gives it its shimmer.
Yes.
And to be pulling that out or helping stimulate it without treading into territory about that where a student might not want to tread. I don't know.
So in that situation, I've been in this situation before. If I see a student or a client's emotions get amped up, then we go back to the breath. So there's fascinating research on the vagus nerve. That's the biggest nerve in our body. And I talk about this with students. It It amps up fight or flight, so it gets us out the door. It starts at the brainstem, it goes all the way down. It's very heightened around the stomach, abdomen area. So if you have butterflies, that's the vagus nerve being activated. How we can regulate emotions is to go back to the breath, to settle the body down. Now, I work with so many different bodies from so many different ages. Activating a deep breath is challenging because it means letting go. And that can be hard, whether it's letting go of emotions or letting go of this amped up, heightened feeling and settling the body. So I will show a picture of the vagus nerve. That's our hardwiring, that's our biology. What is within our control is activating that breath to settle ourselves, to settle, to soothe, to settle ourselves down.
You know, it can be scary to take a deep breath.
Yes, because letting go.
Right.
And I was once called a shallow breather. I've walked the walk.
I think I'm a shallow breather.
And all of this that I have done, all the work that I have done, and mentoring is a journey that I have walked and that I continue to walk. I am not fully baked yet either.
Right.
But it's taking that journey together.
I think taking a deep breath, there's something intuitive about it. A very deep breath where you're filling the bottom of your lungs too, expanding your rib cage to allow that to happen. It's scary because I think, well, you're right, it's ultimately letting go of something. It's first touching it. It's touching an emotional place.
Yes.
And it's amazing sometimes in class, if a student is doing a piece that has maybe, again, some emotionality to it, and they're just rushing. And I know that they don't realize it, but that rushing is subconsciously a defense.
Yes.
And I'll just say, do it again and just really take your time. You have all the time in the world. Just take a big breath and just go slow. And as soon as they do that, it allows the thing to arise,
And magic.
then there it is.
Yeah, I mean, that connection, that's what it's about. But it's risking vulnerability.
Right.
It's risking really being seen. With this generation who doesn't necessarily have as many opportunities for face-to-face or on the phone in the ways that we did, there is a little bit of a shift. And then you throw in kind of this invisible veil of social media where you can badmouth a person without saying it to their face.
Right.
So I encourage actually a sense of community and connection in my class. They're making eye contact with each other. They're staring into each other's eyes for a deathly 2 minutes.
Right.
That's vulnerability.
Right.
But once they connect and you'll see tears flow,
Yeah.
that's powerful.
Right.
But isn't that what it's about? It's
Totally.
human connection. We're wired that way.
That's right. And subsequently an empathic connection.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, these social media platforms are also, they purposefully have addictive algorithms, right? And so when you're a young person growing up with an addictive pathway in your brain, that does crazy things. And I also think they create a false presentation of who we are, like it's a sort of braggart presentation of your life. Look, isn't my life great?
Yeah.
And so there's this sort of subliminal pressure to be perfect.
Yes.
Right? Rather than to be human. And in the work, we're actually encouraging vulnerability, right? Not vulnerability as weakness, but vulnerability as openness.
Yes.
As showing your full humanness.
Yes.
And that's just an interesting thing to me, that vulnerability is not weakness, it's strength.
It is strength, and it's also risk-taking.
Right.
Because when we show that true self, that can get hurt.
It can. But doing it in an artistic form is a great gift, I think, to other people.
I totally agree. And when we step into our light, we give others permission to do the same.
That's great. I love that. I'm going to steal that too.
Oh, Marianne Williamson's,
Said that?
yes, a beautiful quote. But yeah, we give others permission.
Right. Yeah, and when we show our full humanity in the work, people see themselves.
Yes.
And they're like, oh, I'm not alone.
And that's the power of the arts.
Totally. So you do one-on-one coaching for SMTD students about their health and wellness.
Yes.
So what does that entail, and how do students find you?
It's done on Zoom, and Paola, through the Wellness Initiative, will send out a sign-up. Starting fall semester, it will be every other Thursday, I believe, from 4:30 to 7:30. The sessions are around 45 minutes, and anyone in SMTD can sign up, any student. It's great. They always have questions as to what to expect. I make it clear it's confidential, and there's no judgment at all from my end. I'm really here just to help support, to have a dialogue back and forth, and maybe explore some strategies that they might find helpful.
And what is like a common content in those?
I would say a lot of time management, sleep, imposter syndrome, probably are the main topics. And then, that perfectionism, high standard, how to navigate it. But also, sometimes they just need permission to chill for a little while.
Right.
It's okay.
Right.
And a little bit of procrastination. And again, that can be in our hard wiring. We just have to navigate it,
Right.
understand it.
It sounds like a lot of what you've been saying today is about, like, we have the vagus nerve. There's nothing we can do about that.
Right.
What we can do is, what is our relationship to it?
Yes.
What's our relationship to the challenges in our life? Not that we can get rid of them, but we can change how we deal with them.
Exactly. And reframing is a superpower. Seeing it from a different angle. Just because we have a thought about one aspect doesn't mean it's necessarily the only route. We can reframe things to see it from a different perspective. Let's say a person went into audition and they didn't get the part. They failed. No, they actually took a risk. That takes courage.
Totally. And the crazy thing about being in the arts, there's a crazy paradox, which is you have to be very goal-oriented and very hardworking and disciplined in your work. So you have to orient yourself toward a goal with real focus, and yet you have to let go of outcome. It's a very tricky thing to be able to do psychologically.
So true. Yeah, it is. And sometimes it's do the audition and then forget about it and move on. And
Yep.
if something comes from it, great. And that is such a hard lesson to learn. But if we can develop that resilience and that grit to knowing that we showed up prepared, this goes back to that perseverance that we've talked about, honing in on our craft and being the absolute best that we can be. And then surrendering the outcome and trusting. My saying is the universe is unfolding exactly as it should. When I look back over things that I really wanted and was so disappointed when it didn't manifest or come to fruition, I now see that that wasn't meant to be. So we have to see the minute detail, but then we also have to wide lens into trusting the process.
I swear to God, you're my cousin from another life. A little mantra of mine is that we have to toggle between the micro and the macro.
Yeah.
Right? The micro is the details of our life and the pains and the anger, and we have to, pay attention to them and know they're legitimate. And then the macro is understanding like perspective on our place in the world and our good fortune in the world or whatever else.
Yes.
And we go, because if it's just the macro, people can be like, thanks a lot. I'm depressed for whatever reason, and you're saying, look at how bad the world could be otherwise,
Yeah.
But we have to be able to toggle between both. Students that I know that do well tend to have an innate understanding of discipline. And I think of Twyla Tharp's Creative Habit. I'm sure you know the book.
Yes.
And it just becomes a devotion to the craft is part of the stew of what makes someone do well. And yet it feels like it's on a continuum towards perfectionism, and how do we guard against perfectionism, and how does it spill into perfectionism? What is that exactly?
Well, so perfectionism it's an interesting beast, and I call it a beast because sometimes people confuse a very high standard
Right, that's what I'm talking about, yeah.
as being a perfectionist. They're actually two separate things. Perfectionism is about control. It's about, let's say, the end result in that, well, I have to do it perfectly or I won't look good or I won't be liked, or it's an out there. It can hinder us right here. But if we're open to curiosity, to honing our craft, knowing that the process of improvement in anything, let's say learning a role, we're going to make mistakes on the lines until we continue to work it. We can't be perfect at it in that moment. It's a work in progress. So when we trust it, surrender to the flow of just showing up day in and day out and putting in the work, that's a high standard of discipline. That's a discipline part. The perfectionism is the side that wants to have control in order to mostly feel safe.
That's a really fascinating definition. That's enlightening to me. There's another fine line, I think, between, I feel like many great artists have a kind of insatiable appetite for going further, for more detail, for never really fully being satisfied with their work. But that too is a fine line between that, which I think is kind of healthy in some ways,
Yes.
and being self-punishing. Like, we don't want to be self-punishing.
So if it turns into self-punishing, then that's a form really of control, of that perfectionism. But if we learn, and it's difficult to navigate, like you're saying, toggling back and forth, if we learn from fill in the blank to know in moving forward to do X, Y, or Z better because of that experience, that's developing a growth mindset and not one that is punishing or shame-filled or fill in the blank. That is not helpful thinking.
See, now I'm seeing a common thread there in what you just said. That's a great phrase, growth mindset. Whether you're an artist, whether it's about your own health, what is the mindset and a growth mindset? That's really wonderful. I'm wondering some more personal questions, like who are some people who've influenced you, whether people you know or just even people out there in the field or just anyone? Who are some of your influences?
A dear mentor of mine, Carolyn Santanicola, was a woman that I actually worked with for many years. She's 25 years older than I am and carried my babies in class when I was getting back into shape. She never judged me. We would sit and talk. We were just soulmates on so many levels. But I tried to live her example there were never strings attached to my friendship with her. And we can pick up as of time, because she lives in New York.
Right.
There's that connection that I feel, and I'm so grateful to her. I trusted through her example in having kids and then continuing on dancing. She did it. She was my role model. So definitely her. I think different people come into our lives for a reason. I really try to walk her example when I work with students and clients.
Nice. And she's still around. You're still in touch with her?
She is, yes.
Great. What's her name again?
Carolyn Santanicola.
Carolyn Santanicola. This Faculty in Focus is dedicated to you.
Yes. It is because I'm sitting here because of her.
I totally hear that. I have some people in my life like that too.
Yes.
Amy, this was so great to talk to you. I feel like I learned a lot talking to you. It was awesome.
Thank you.
I want
too.
you to be my health and wellness coach. How do I get to do that? Anyway, thank you for joining this Faculty in Focus, and enjoy the rest of your day.